because sex education is sometimes still like very mechanic or just directive. You should do this, you should do that, but oftentimes it wipes away people's diversity. How does it feel like to have unprotected sex? Because a lot of people do have it. That I think is what made us very real and vulnerable, and sometimes not so decent, because we also make mistakes, we hurt people, and we get hurt.
The third culture is what emerges at the intersection between your culture of origin and the other cultures by which you've been shaped. Beyond Asian is a place for stories of global nomads with Asian roots brought up in diversity. Together, we explore the interplay of our pasts with our presents and our relationships with the multiple cultures we move in. These are more than conversations about Asian identity. They're portraits of whole people, what keeps them up at night, what their hearts long for, and the impact they hope to have on their communities. I'm your host, Sen Zhan, a third culture kid born in China, raised in Canada, and currently based in Berlin. This series is a first step towards making peace with my own Asian background, and it's my hope that other third culture Asians will hear themselves reflected in our stories. Have you ever wondered where all the sex talk is in Asian communities? In episode 1, I'm speaking with Jess, a community builder who hosts a massively popular sex-positive podcast. Jess, thank you for taking the time today in your really busy schedule to talk to me and to be on the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me, Sen. This is my first interview that I received.
Which I find really surprising considering the fact that you've done, I think I counted 80 plus episodes on your podcast and something like 21 vlog posts on your YouTube channel.
Yeah, well, I always enjoyed interviewing people, and I actually like sharing about my own opinions in my life. So I guess most of the time I mixed both. So when I interview, I already express some of my own ideas, but I've never received this kind of serious interview.
Well, we won't be serious, don't worry. We'll keep it as not serious as possible. I have listened to a few episodes, both the English episodes and the Chinese episodes of your Sex Positive podcast, even though my Chinese isn't the best, so I don't catch all of it. But I remember when you told me about it and you said it's the only sex positive podcast in China, which is something to say in and of itself. And on top of that, you have 1 million followers. Is that right?
Well, yeah, nowadays I think number is not that accurate or important, because I used to have more than 100,000 followers and 10 million views. But this number was wiped away because the whole podcast was taken down by the government several times actually already. And so afterwards, now we only have like about 20,000 followers. But I guess those are the real, like what they call true fans.
They found you despite being censored.
Yeah, exactly. We call it the only sex positive podcast, but there are, and there were already some sex education podcasts. But from our perspective, it's different, because sex education is sometimes still like very mechanic or just directive. You should do this, you should do that. But oftentimes it wipes away people's diversity, and there's a lot of nuances in some act. And it's, for example, for unprotected sex, and sex education podcast would only say, don't do that. But maybe we will then approach it from a very realistic point of view, like how does it feel like to have unprotected sex, because a lot of people do have it. So something like that. So that's why we call it the only sex positive one, because of the nuances and because we approach it from our own experiences, not just three of us, but also like people who we interviewed, they also share about their own lived experience. So we found that very valuable.
Tell me about the title of the podcast.
The name of the podcast is called Bitch Up. So it's bitch is a way to reclaim this world and to destigmatize this world. And bitch up is like similar to people always say you man up, and we say you bitch up.
Bitch up, yeah. And there's also the Chinese word, the Chinese title, which is, of course, much more well known because it's a Chinese podcast.
It's called 表酱. 表 is bitch, and 酱 is both literally means sauce, but it also can use as a like you put in the end of a female name. Yeah, I don't know how to translate it, but the essence is there, bitch.
The essence is, it's really this, because I listened to the first podcast as well. And this was where you were talking about the origins of this word, bitch, biao, in Chinese. And, even though, again, my Chinese isn't the best, I captured that there was this reclaiming of a word that usually, is meant to label a woman as difficult or slutty or anything really, anything that is that's not desirable in the mainstream sense of the word for a woman. Yeah,
or desirable but dangerous.
Okay, so there's also that like a femme fatale kind of feeling.
Yeah. So the first episode was called why do we want to be bitches? Yeah, that was the whole episode, and we just want to use this word and feel free to feel slutty and to also navigate this whole world of sex positivity and taking care of ourselves and taking care of our boundaries and also doing fun things. I had quite many episodes on sex workers because I met some workers but in other play parties or other scenarios, and then we clicked and I was like, do you want to be my podcast guest? And many of them said yes. So that's how we ended up doing an episode. So yeah, it was really spontaneous.
And you also live in Amsterdam, which is renowned for its red light district. Did you meet some of your guests for their podcast there?
Yes, actually our second episode was about that. So me and my housemate, we went to a brothel actually in the red light district, and then we interviewed the owner of it. We were really lucky because that was our second episode, and then it was put on the homepage on that platform at that time by the editor, because they saw this very interesting topic, and then they helped us to just get known.
So your podcast was on the website of the brothel?
No. It was on the website of the homepage of this podcast platform. So in China, we have those kind of, all sorts of platforms like...
Okay, I was asking myself, I was like, brothels have websites?
Well, they do. Many of them do. It's legal, it's serious, and it's really well managed and well regulated industry. So,
did you learn things that were surprising about the sex work industry? Because you already have a base in knowledge that a lot of people don't have. So going into an interview with the manager of a brothel or with sex workers, were you surprised by things that you learned?
Yeah, in a way. At that time, I only knew things by reading, like in Amsterdam it's legal and things like that. But when I really went there, I got a more embodied feeling of what's it like to work there, because we also met a few girls who were working there, and we talked to the owner, and we went to their working space, and so everything was more alive when you were really there. And then I also got more details about how what's the work like there, and yeah, so I guess I was very impressed how organized and also how open those girls were talking about their work. But of course, this is only a tip of iceberg of this whole sex industry, because of course there are other darker sides, and also people are not very happy about the Dutch model, which is legalization. Because with the legalization, there's also basically you draw a line, and people who are registered are legal, and then you have a lot of illegal sex workers who are either evicted or given penalty. So it's not ideal.
What were some of the effects? What were some of the reverberations that you felt in the community once you started to do this more regularly?
So back to the second episode already, like we started to see a skyrocketing of the followers. So suddenly we just very quickly had thousands of followers. And of course, the whole sex topic is always very eye-catching. So I guess there were a lot of people following us and getting some kind of information. And many of them actually responded very positively, saying that they feel, first of all, liberated, and because there were 3 girls talking about their own sex life and talking about their own, and interviewing other people who are very experimental or explorative. So that in and of itself has encouraged a lot of people to open up. And also we talk a lot about health and consent, those kind of things, which also I believe set a pretty healthy tone for all the sex activities we are doing or other people are going to do. So that's, in that sense, it's also a little bit educational. Yeah.
When you talk about doing a specific act, like doing a tying act or engaging in any kind of, sexual experiment, you talk a lot about just the details, specifics of like practical things, more like, okay, when you are in the act and, say you're in a funny position, I guess, what do you actually do? Like, how do you navigate that very real problem?
Yeah. Because I always believe that meanings are made in details, and all the fun, all the juicy things are in the details. So that's also what's missing in most of those very dry educational sex education articles or things like that. So we always try to really just to take a really close up look at how you feel in that thing, and how you move, and especially if you have some struggles, and which a lot of people do, because sex is not just fun or not just not fun, because a lot of times we are in this very ambivalent position and how we feel about that, and we also talk about all those kind of struggles, and that I think is what made us very real and vulnerable, and sometimes not so decent, because we also make mistakes, we hurt people and we get hurt, and sometimes we also share, like one of our hosts like got an STD, which also all those kind of things, and because they happen to everyone. Oh, not everyone, but a lot of people.
They happen to much more people than we realize, than we hear about. And the way that you talk about sex on your podcast is the way that a lot of people talk about hair or talk about cooking, like very, very matter of fact, very everyday. There's no issue with talking about exactly what the knife technique is when you cut a piece of garlic for cooking, or
exactly in what angle and how hard do you go and those kind of things. Yeah, it's the same.
Yeah. And you talked about being shut down by the government a couple of times. What is that like to be censored? When that first happened, what was that experience like?
Oh, yeah. We always, because nowadays we've been shut down so many times, and sometimes it's just several episodes were deleted, and sometimes it's the whole podcast being deleted. Nowadays I'm more like cool about it. Like, of course I get frustrated, but I get more resilient, so I don't feel sad for too long. But I still remember in the first time we had that, we were like, we were shocked, we were crying, and we didn't know what to do, and definitely scared, because we don't know, like, if the podcast was shut down, whether like we will get in trouble personally as well. So this kind of fear is still there. I think even now this is always like in the background of me, like maybe one day I'm gonna be I don't know. So there are a lot of risks and fear still. But I guess at that time we also got frustrated, and we almost thought of giving up, quitting doing this podcast. But after a few days, I guess, or a week or so, we're back.
This kind of censorship, especially, in a place like China, where censorship, it's kind of the rule, anything that is a little bit incendiary, anything that talks about taboo topics or pushes the envelope is immediately looked at as if it could be dangerous to the state. Do you mind sharing a bit about how that came to your attention? Were you Were you sent an email, or did you just arrive one day on